A lot of students ask me this on occasion: why do we go to so much effort to learn about the Greeks and the Romans? They've been dead for an awfully long time and their languages are rather hard to understand. And I think the more important point is that the Greeks and the Romans and their culture have in many ways influenced the modern culture of the Western world. And really, if we want to understand our modern culture, we have to understand something about the Greek and the Roman worlds. One very obvious example here is Christianity. We tend to forget that Christianity was a religion of the Roman Empire. Or another example here, of course, is language. Modern Greek developed from classical Greek, and Latin formed the basis for a number of modern European languages. One particularly important example is in politics. A lot of political thought in the modern world has been influenced especially by Greek political thought and Greek. So the most obvious example here, of course, is Athenian democracy. The Greeks had a very strong sense that their laws should be written down and that people should be equal under the laws. Now, of course, this isn't the only example in the political sphere. Sometimes the influence of the classical world is rather more malignant than that. The Nazis in Germany, they looked not so much to the Athenians and their democracy for their inspiration, but to the Spartans. And it was a state that, so the Nazis believed, practiced a certain amount of eugenics. So we're told by some of the ancient sources at least that the Spartans would practice infanticide against children who were born and clearly weren't strong enough to be of use to their state. And so the Nazis dreamt up this idea that the Spartans were Dorians and racially separate from some other Greek groups, and that the Dorians were an Aryan race, just as Hitler and his cronies thought that the Germans were an Aryan race. It's not just in public political life that the classical world is important either. It's important to some aspects of our private life. This image here, an image of the so-called Farnese Hercules. We've got a very sort of recognizable form of ideal body. Hercules is very muscly, he has a very well-developed six-pack. The important thing here for us to note is that this ideal of the perfect body that the Greeks and the Romans had is really very similar to our idea of the perfect body, and in fact has influenced this. One of the founding fathers of modern bodybuilding was a German by the name of Eugen Sandow, who specifically modeled himself after this very statue, and there are photos that he had taken of him posing in exactly the same pose alongside this Roman statue. Or to take another, even more famous bodybuilder, there's Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is on record as saying that he was inspired by images of Hercules. And even if we don't subscribe to the extremes of modern bodybuilding, we all in Western culture think we have an idea about what the ideal male body looks like. And this is very much a Greco-Roman idea, even if we don't quite recognize it. One of the ways in which Greek and Roman culture have influenced the modern Western world is, of course, art and literature. So at the most basic level, when it comes to the visual arts, many of the techniques developed in the classical world were then rediscovered and reused in the Renaissance. And also various classical themes, classical myths, incidents from Greco-Roman history, these have provided the inspiration and starting point for other works of art and literature. Margaret Atwood's book, The Penelopead, which takes the Greek myth of the Odyssey and then reimagines things from another perspective. And of course, it's not just in high culture that this sort of influence is visible, and we see it in popular culture as well. One can think of recent movies like Troy and Gladiator, and it probably obtained its most striking manifestation in the Hercules films. And so we had Hercules and the Captive Women, Hercules versus the Mongols, and Hercules and the Moon Men. And then, of course, the Americans, never to be outdone by their European cousins, decided they had to get into the act, and so in 1970 they made Hercules in New York, starring none other than the young bodybuilder Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the humour of the film revolved mostly around the fact that Arnie's social interactions with the New Yorkers were somewhat socially awkward, to say the least. Anyway, by finishing up with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the role of Hercules, I don't mean to suggest that the influence of classical culture is in any sense trivial in modern culture. I think it's probably more accurate to say that it's ubiquitous, that it's all around us. It pops up in all manner of different places. So in the ways we think about our own bodies, in the ways that we think about how our state should be governed and how our politicians should behave, the classical world is in a sense always with us.